Hello and thanks for accessing these I'm Curious About videos. In this video, I am actually talk about the book Deep Roots, Wild Branches, written by Reverend Dr. Michael Beck. It's about the Fresh Expressions movement, which might sound like it has a fancy title, like it's some new program, the next best thing to save the church, but actually it's just a modern repackaging of 2,000-year-old missional theology. We talk about what it looks like when churches empower lay leaders to start little forms of missional communities in their daily lives, aligned with things that they're already passionate about, hobbies they have, whatever. And so it's a beautiful vision of the kind of church renewal that's possible. So I hope you find this conversation helpful. I hope you watch it with a group of leaders at your church and really take time for the discussion questions afterward, because this is one of the things that gives me hope as I see the Holy Spirit rerouting us in our neighborhoods and bringing about new, exciting, small ministries that help us connect with those who aren't coming on Sunday mornings, but still have a hunger for community. So I hope it's a rich discussion for you. Make sure to stick around and take some time with the discussion questions afterwards.
Welcome everyone to tonight's I'm Curious About conversation. Tonight we are going to be curious together about how God is renewing the church. We hope this sparks your curiosity and inspires you to take whatever next step the Spirit might be calling you to in your place. Our presenter tonight is Pastor Matt Short, the assistant to the bishop for Evangelical Mission in our Greater Milwaukee Synod. Welcome and thank you. And Pastor Matt, would you just give us a brief refresher on what it means that you are the assistant to the bishop for Evangelical Mission?
Yeah, I actually have this down because I preach in a different church every Sunday. And so I've gotten really used to trying to say very succinctly what this ridiculous job title means. So I tell people that I have a fun job because I get to be the evangelism and mission guy on Synod staff, meaning evangelical mission. Evangelical simply means good news, and mission means it's not just for us. And so that is the stuff that is most important to me, is that we are remembering why churches were built and birthed by the Spirit in the first place, and what is our mission in the world. Because once we're really clear about why we exist, then all the other pieces follow behind that. But if we're not clear about why we exist and we just focus on what we do and how to do it better, then we can sometimes kind of get off track. But when we're really clear about, like, we have good news the world needs, and goodness, here's my like super short summary of that. All the metrics show that loneliness is on the rise. There's a bit of a loneliness epidemic. Suicide rates are on the rise, particularly among uh, youth and youth who are part of the LGBTQIA community. And here we sit with this rich form of community where everybody's welcome and there's no prerequisites for inclusion. The world needs the good news that we have. So that's what's most important to me.
Thank you. And you use that word clarity of mission. So in the interest of clarity of mission, of our mission together tonight, in a sentence or two, could you tell us what you're sharing with us tonight and why you are so excited about it?
Yeah, tonight we're going to be talking first kind of about the book Deep Roots, Wild Branches, written by Reverend Dr. Michael Beck, who's a Methodist pastor, but also somebody who's been really helping bring some of the fresh expressions movement. That's the language for it, fresh expressions. Although, let's be honest, it is really nothing but good biblical missional theology that's 2,000 years old. It's simply packaged in a certain way. And Michael Beck has been helping bring some of this approach to the United States. It's actually something that's been taking root in Europe for a good 20 years. They're about 20 years in our future in terms of institutional decline. But institutional decline does not mean that the kingdom of God is in decline. And so the Spirit is birthing new things. And he writes this book, Deep Roots, Wild Branches. And I really want to talk with you all about some of the rich things in the book and just in this approach to ministry.
Thanks for that summary. Well, let's get right into those things, those direct things that you want to share with us. What were some of your big takeaways as you read this book? Keeping in mind that maybe not all of us will read this book. What are the things we can take away, regardless of whether we're going to go out and buy this book after the conversation tonight?
Yeah, I think one of the things that he starts with in the book is just about the current state of the church. And he jokingly, when you talk to him, he will jokingly say that pastors always need to start with a clear articulation, and leaders in general start with a clear articulation of what reality is. And sometimes that's a bit of a bummer. So I actually stole a couple of his slides, and I'm going to share those now because I thought, and this was with permission, but I thought it would be helpful for us to just wrap our heads around like the current reality of what's going on and how it feels like a bummer at first, but actually it's an incredible opportunity. So with that, this is, can you all see the current attitudes towards church in the US? This is the reality from the Pew Research and American Church Research Project, is that 20% of people, about 20% of the American population, attends church regularly. Another 20% don't attend church, but say they do. Do any of you know those folks? It's okay. Sometimes it's us, right? And another 20% say they would attend church if they were invited by a friend. And then about 40% have no interest in church and won't walk into one on a Sunday morning. So what you can see there is you can see a huge change from previous generations, but you can also see an incredible opportunity to bring the good news outside of our current forms of worship. One of the things that he says in the book is that we're putting an awful lot of eggs in the Sunday morning basket. And that's just not the only basket there is. But a lot of our churches, that's kind of the thing that worked for a good couple generations, was the Sunday morning thing. And so that was our primary focus. And I thought that was just a helpful and kind of funny way to put it. We're putting an awful lot of eggs in the Sunday morning basket. He also references this passage from Judges 2. And if you know the arc of that narrative, you know that there was a whole generation. Here it says, moreover, that whole generation was gathered to their ancestors, and another generation grew up after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And his contention in this book is that's where we're at right now, is that a whole generation has grown up who does not know the work of the Lord, or the work or the narrative of the Exodus, the narrative of freedom in the New Testament. In the book, he also says that the first task of a leader is to paint an accurate picture of reality. So that's where statistics like that first slide I showed you might be hard to see, but at least it's a clear assessment of where we're at. This is one of the things that he did in a presentation I saw him do, and he talks about this a little bit in the book, that I thought was really, really telling. It's a visual picture of what the changes that have happened, even in the span of the last 15 to 20 years. So this is St. Peter's Square in Rome, waiting for the Pope to speak. This is the crowd waiting for the Pope to speak in 2005. This is the crowd waiting for the Pope to speak in 2013, 8 years later. Look at the difference. 2005, 2013, every single person has a screen in their hand. I find that particularly helpful as a visual image of just how much the world has changed, just how much the context has changed. And in this book, the thing I love about it is that he paints this as an opportunity. It really is an opportunity. So that was one of the biggest takeaways for me. And I can say some more about that, but basically his contention is we can see this as the greatest missional opportunity in many generations. There are people who are hungry for community, and here we have a beautiful sense of community. We just need to kind of break it out of, not abandon Sunday morning, but just make sure it is not trapped only in Sunday morning.
So you mentioned the term fresh expressions. What do fresh expressions have to do with that time of opportunity and seizing that opportunity?
Yeah, so that's just a name that's been given to this movement of trying little missional experiments that are primarily lay led. They're primarily led by lay members. And maybe I'll say just a tiny bit more about some of the things that he sees um, changing in the world. One of them is the importance of what many sociologists would call third spaces. So the first space is the home, second spaces are school or work, right? So that's kind of where we spend the majority of our time, either in the first space of home or the second space of school or work. Third spaces are those neutral spaces in the culture where we interact with people who we don't live with and who we don't go to school or work with. So a baseball stadium would be a third space, a coffee shop, a pub, things like that, a park, a library. These are all third spaces, and churches can be third spaces, but they're not the only ones. So what this movement of fresh expressions is about trying to find ways for the church to do both, tending to the inherited system. And he uses in this book, the thing I love, and this is where the title of the book comes from. Um, the title of the book is Deep Roots, Wild Branches. He's using an agrarian metaphor. And what he's saying is both are important. I think a lot of times when we talk about doing new things in the church, it feels to some who value the old things we've done in the church like new things have to come at the expense of old things. And his contention in this book is that we are really called to do both, to tend to the inherited tree like the root stock, and to let the new wild branches grow. He actually steals the imagery from Romans 11, if and I can add this into the video later, but Romans 11 verses 16 and 17 say this: if part of the dough offered as first fruits is holy, then the whole batch is holy. And if the root is holy, then the branches are also holy. But if some of the branches were broken off and you, a wild olive shoot, were grafted in their place, then you share the rich root of the olive tree. So it's actually a deeply biblical image that Paul in the book of Romans uses to describe the Gentiles being grafted in to the promise. And I really love that idea that we're called to do both. So he talks about fresh expressions as these new little missional communities that are birthed out in the world. So an example would be, and we're going to end the conversation or this presentation time today with a video that gives some snapshots of what this can look like. But it's basically about finding those third spaces and where people are gathering, entering those spaces in a spirit of accompaniment, building relationships, building community first. Then there are ways that you can introduce into these gatherings in third spaces little aspects of Christian community so that you're actually starting to build these new little what he calls fresh expressions, or these wild branches in third spaces, and not expecting that the only place ministry happens is in the church or in the 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. window. So a concrete example would be there was a young woman who went to the dog park all the time to let her dog run around with other people's dogs. Over time, she had really built kind of a little community of people. Like they hung out and talked and sat at the tables while their dogs were running around together. At some point, she began to say, they got into deep conversations about what was going on in the world. And I think the first conversations were about what's keeping them grounded in these crazy days. And she talked about the fact that her faith gives her hope. And I mean, this was the long game, right? She didn't just go in there guns blazing trying to start a church, but organically over time, she started to talk about what was giving her hope. And then there's a model of how you can just introduce a little Jesus story, like where you read a story together from Jesus's life, and you just share with each other, what would this story be like if it happened today? Like Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Who would the Samaritans be today? And you just let everybody share and talk about that. Later, if it continues to develop, you can even introduce a small celebration of Holy Communion. And then lo and behold, that little thing starts to look an awful lot like church. in the place where people are already gathering, in the third space. Interestingly enough, then in the book, he talks about how you don't do this for the purpose of revitalizing the existing church, but it actually does have that effect because it helps the existing church kind of wake up from what he calls apostolic amnesia. How's that for a phrase? And really, he's just meaning kind of what I started with. We are all, one of the things I often say when I go preach in places is, sometimes I'll work it into the end of my sermon, that job title, Evangelical Mission, is not just mine. It's all of ours because we have good news and it's not just for us. And when we remember that, then there are very simple ways to bring that with us into everyday life.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask you maybe to reiterate a point. The person who started the dog park church, or the person who might launch those kind of tiny seeds of Jesus conversations, how much theological training do they have?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. It essentially, like, to start to lean into this model, there is actually some training that goes on, um, in terms of how to deal with a really diverse group of people, right? And so the training that the people who start these have is really just, are they in their own regular Bible study? Are they in their own regular faith formation apart from this new fresh expression so that their faith is being strengthened? Um, and then they have things to carry into this new sense of community. And then I think the churches that have really leaned into this just create little support systems for the people who are starting the fresh expressions so that when, as you can imagine, like this even happens in our churches, right? So it's certainly going to happen at the dog park. Somebody, if you're going to engage people in conversation, somebody might throw something out that's actually like wildly different from the teachings of Jesus. And one of the things they coach people to do is to just say, well, that's a really interesting point. Typically in Christianity, we've said that fill in the blank and then try to quote Jesus as best you can, not just insert your own ideas. But it's a way to welcome people's thoughts, but say really the core of Jesus's teaching was a little different than what you just said. And to and Michael Beck, the author here, has said that there's definitely an art to that, to how you hold space for very diverse religious beliefs, but the impulse is so beautiful to try to create spaces in those third spaces for church, for the story of Jesus.
Yeah, I imagine we don't always have space, or not everybody engages the space in our traditional spaces to ask those wild questions. So if someone here tonight or someone watching this recording later is intrigued by what we are talking about, what might be a next step for a congregation or some members of a congregation?
I would say a couple easy first steps are, actually we'll provide the link to the video that I'm going to show in a minute, which just gives a good snapshot of what's possible. Um, it would be to watch the video. I would say this would be a super simple first step. Watch the video, it's 5 minutes long, and then use those same three rich questions that we've learned for discussion afterwards. And it can be with the council, it could be with the whole congregation, it could be if your congregation has a mission renewal team. One of my dreams is that we get to the day where every single congregation in our synod has a mission renewal team. Like that's what that group's job is to renew our sense of purpose and mission in the world. So whoever, you could watch that video, 5 minutes long, and then hold space for the three questions. What do you notice? What questions are coming to your mind? What might God be nudging us to do in response to this video? And you hold enough time. I just said those in short succession, but in actual practice, you would just start with the first one. What do you notice? And then hold lots of time for that. Let people say, well, I noticed this. After that kind of exhausts itself, then hold lots of time for what questions are coming to your mind. And then likewise, hold lots of time for each question. That would be a very simple first thing. Another simple first step could potentially be to get the book, Deep Roots, Wild Branches. It's formatted in a way that's really good for group discussion. So the chapters are not very long. And then he ends each chapter, I'm looking at the book right now, with a thing he calls picnic talk. So every chapter ends with a focus and a couple discussion questions. So it'd be a really interesting book to work your way through. And the other thing that's really important for us to remember is in this age of quick fixes, there is no quick fix for apostolic amnesia. It is just something we wake up from gradually, and that's okay. The video that we'll look at in a minute here, Dr. Beck is really quick to say that took 11 years. That was 11 years of investment in leaning back into some of the scriptures that draw us out of our churches and helping people catch fire for that. Yeah, you can go to freshexpressions.com and there's some great resources there. But really, here's the summary. If I had to summarize all of this in one kind of arc, this is how he describes it in the book, and I love it. It's kind of a 5-step process. Listen to God and to your community. Love people where they're at in those third spaces. And you don't move on to the next step until you've done the first one in a really rich way. Listen to God and community. Love people where they are at. Build community in those third spaces. Notice that the fourth of 5 steps is share Jesus. And that could be the simple Jesus story thing of let's read a passage and just ask the question, what would this story be like if it happened today? And then you find out that kind of looks like church. And then you repeat, listen to God and community, love people where they're at, build community in third spaces, share Jesus. And it turns out God builds the church in that way. It's very apostolic. It's not the next thing to save the church. It's missional theology that's 2,000 years old.
I tried to get some of those in the chat, but I'm not very good at listening and typing at the same time. Just know that if you were trying to take feverish notes, we're going to provide some notes for you. So you can put your pen down and listen if you'd like to. So I think we're going to share that video. So we all get to take that first step together tonight. We'll watch the video, and in our small groups, those will be our discussion questions. What do you notice? What questions do you have? And where might God's Spirit be nudging us based on the video we are about to see?
We're here in Wildwood, Florida, and I'm about to introduce you to the world that is my parish. 3 Dozen Bibles is a church that happens in a Moe's Southwest Grill. Tattoo parlor church. Church happening in a tattoo parlor.
Church 3.1 gives people a chance to get out, get fit, talk about Jesus.
Yoga therapy church. Mind, body, and soul meeting together. People in the community bring their dogs here. So we're having church here today.
Cheer Love is a fresh expression. I bring my scissors, my blow dryer, and try to let them know that they are loved by God.
Faithfully Fit came out of making relationships with people that are already there in the park. So we do a short devotion, and then we get out there and we just walk.
On Wednesdays is when they have the Taste of Grace, the community come together to eat.
I took the door off my office, off the hinges, and I put that in the sanctuary and just let the congregation know that I was not going to be in that office. And this guy, John Wesley, he said this thing like, the world is my parish. So I let them know that I would be doing that I would go out in the community, and that would be my office, connecting with people, being in those spaces, building relationships.
To be honest, when he first started talking about Fresh Expressions, we were very skeptical and felt he was ignoring the needs of the older parishioners who, because of their loyalty to the church, they deserved his time and attention. And, you know, at a certain point, it was very interesting to watch as the Holy Spirit kind of took over.
My goal was to navigate those 2 worlds of taking care of the folks, the saints who've been holding this church together, and at the same time, do things in the community. We got some folks willing that had experienced the Vision Day and had caught kind of a vision for this. We brought them to a pioneer learning community. So they got actually immersive training in these concepts and do's and don'ts. So then we just started to encourage people to find like your passion, your hobby. Let's start talking about that, how it can be a fresh expression. And one after another, we started to kind of just explore ideas.
We're encouraging them and letting them know that they don't have to be a professional minister, that God has called them, you know, just right where they are. They're able to start up these smaller communities inside of their own community.
We are kind of planting green spaces throughout our community. We would call them fresh expressions. But we also have to take care of the inherited, what I like to call the tree. So there's that inherited tree that's been there for a long time and has lived through the desert of decline and post-Christendom. So when we're grafted together in this way, we're seeing this new kind of vineyard emerge. And our church is no longer really defined about just the rootstock, just the tree. But now people in our community experience us in all these different ways. Like they're that church over there in the tattoo parlor, and they're the one in the Mexican restaurant. They do that thing in the park.
Our church is growing, and a lot of the growth is coming from people accepting Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior.
I was at a point in my life where I would have probably not stepped foot back into church because I had been hurt so much. But then I went to a fresh expression, something like this, and that's where I guess I re-fell in love with God. And here I am, like a year later, and I'm like about to start my own.
So I think in a smaller church that we sometimes look at our barriers rather than our assets. So we have to give permission to fail forward. It's okay to throw a lot of noodles at the wall and see what sticks and what comes out of it.
Wildwood is a normal church. We do all those things every week that most churches do. We have Bible studies, we have Celebrate Recovery programs. But then every week at Wildwood, there's some not so normal things happening in the sense of traditional church, as most of us have experienced it. And almost every day, there's some fresh expression meeting in some location throughout the community. And so those things are happening, coexisting beside all the normal traditional things that are happening in a church and giving life to each other. So those traditional forms are sending people out into the fresh expressions. The fresh expressions are sending people who matriculate back to the church. And there's an exchange that's going on there that's life-giving. And that, I think, is probably the most powerful thing about fresh expressions in an inherited mixed economy way is you release the mission force that's sitting in your pews every Sunday.
I have seen that video more than once, and it inspires me every time.
There's something about it, and the thing I would want folks to know is that after 11 years, yes, they have a number of different things happening. But even if your congregation just wanted to try one, the other thing he's very quick to say is that these fresh expressions have a life cycle. And so the purpose is the impulse, not the like, now we're going to do dog park church for 30 years. Dog park church might work for a couple years, but the impulse of saying, okay, where's a new third space? Where's a hobby that you have that could lead you to this? I want to share one last thing, which is just my why. I think it's really good for all of us to always be clear about what our why is. And if you've ever gotten an email from me, there's two things at the bottom of every email I send. One is a quote from Acts 2:39, and one is a quote from Frederick Buechner. First of all, the one from Acts. It says this: "The promise is for you, for your children, and for all who are far away, everyone whom the Lord our God calls to him." I love the idea that the promise is for us and for our children and for all who are far away. Remember those first percentages: 20% of us go to church, 80% are far away, and the promise is for them too. Frederick Buechner, famous author, had this quote: "What I had always hoped was that since I come so much from the same kind of world that those people who don't touch Christianity with a 10-foot pole also come from, maybe I could be a bridge, one of their own who had gone over to the other side, saying things in a language that they would understand."
Wow, that's something really deep to think about as we prepare to celebrate Pentecost. Thank you very much, Pastor Matt, for this discussion. If you're here live with us, we're going to move into our small group discussions soon. But first, I want to let you know that these conversations are going to take a break for the summer. However, we will be back in September with a new name, Inspired for Mission, and a new lineup of topics to help inspire us and help us inspire one another to join in God's mission. In the meantime, we invite you to share this conversation, the recording of this conversation, and any of our other I'm curious about conversations that have inspired you. Those are all available at milwaukeesynod.org/curious.
And do you ever say something, maybe this is just a dad thing where you like make a joke and it makes you laugh, but maybe other people think it's dumb. Judy, when you said something about getting butts in the pews, it came to my mind, no, this is about getting the pews out to where the butts are.
Yeah.
And I love this idea. Like, I could almost picture like ripping up one pew out of the back of our church and putting it out in the world.
For those who need a pew to sit on. Yeah.
Well, but like, what would that be like if you put a pew out somewhere and you just put like a sign that said like, penny for your thoughts, or, you know, we'll listen? Be a fascinating experiment. Anyway, so I made myself laugh. Instead of butts in the pews, let's get the pews to where the butts are.
There, yeah. And a good point.